Okay, great. Thank you, everybody. I'm so glad that you're taking this time to watch this video of the replay of what's been happening in the class today. Today, we do have a guest speaker. Her name is Rena Reese, and she is the General Counsel and Vice President of Marriott International. And she's going to be talking about the subject of mentoring your best team, which we have been reading about and watching videos on this past week. So we're going to have a kind of question and answer with Rena, and then we'll continue on and talk about the materials that we read and listened to and looked at from this past week. So that being said, if this is what is going to interest you, then continue watching. If not, then I hope the materials were suitable for you. So, and I see that we do have a couple other people that joined. Leah, nice to see you.
Hi.
Hi, Leah, this is Rena.
Hi there.
And I see also we have Afavi. Did I say your name correctly? Oh, I think you just muted yourself. Okay. So we have one more new person that's come in here. But I thought that what we would do is we'd start off today, and I think I disclosed to you guys last week the great fortune that I have of Rena being my cousin. And I will tell you, she is a stellar cousin. But she also is a stellar woman, very fortunate woman who has actually been able to use her intelligence and her strength and been able to balance her work and her life and really do a lot of good in this world. And so I will just introduce Rena. And Rena, I did give everybody your bio, but maybe you could talk about a little bit of your career path and your career journey. Yeah, I'll just start with that and then follow up.
Okay, that's great. Well, hello, everybody, and thanks for joining. And thank you, Rachel, for having me. Everything she said about me was very kind, but it's my good fortune to, I'm actually married to Rachel's first cousin, and it's a very special family, as you can probably tell from Rachel. So I'll talk a little bit about what I'm doing now, in particular, what this past year has been like, because I think for all of us in many different ways, it has been a journey, but also like a baptism by fire a little bit in terms of what we've done in our lives, our careers, our health, our family, mental health, emotional health, and the rest. So as Rachel mentioned, I'm the general counsel at Marriott International. We like to say we're the world's largest hotel company. We were also, like many others in the hospitality industry, completely devastated by the COVID pandemic, to the point where I think it was last April, our revenues fell 95%. And when that happens to any company, you go into sort of hyper alert mode, what you need to do to really kind of save the company. The whole industry, as you know, was shut down, locked down, as we all experienced the beginning of the COVID pandemic. And I remember having a town hall with my law department team. So our department is headquartered in Bethesda, Maryland, outside of Washington, and we have offices all over the world. And we had a town hall Monday morning, March 16th. I mean, literally, these things are burned into my brain. And by Thursday morning, we were all at home, not to see each other again for several months. So my time at Marriott, this is actually what I call my second tour of duty. I started at Marriott back a long time ago in June of 2000. I was a hotel development lawyer, which means, you know, we support the members of the business team who go out and find new places to develop new hotels. And I sort of worked in a variety of capacity in the law department. And then about 10 years later was offered the opportunity to go out to Chicago in the general counsel role. And I like to say it was a role that sort of took me from a view of the world like this to a view of the world, one can't see me, which is much, 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 much broader. And the reason that I was willing to make the move at that time was it was the right time in my personal life to make the move. We have 2 kids. They were both grown. They were out of the house. One was still in college. One was just graduating from college. My husband, who is a journalist, was at a point where he said, no, I've sort of had a great run here and I can make the move. But I am very fond of saying that things have to sort of come up at the right time. And some of it is planning and most of it is not. A lot of it is serendipity. And I think that, and we can talk about this a little later, there are times in your life when you're ready to take a leap of faith. And there are times when you decide, it's not really the right time for me. And what I have learned over the past really 10, 11 years as a senior leader is that it is our job when people say, it's not really the right time for me for whatever reason, to say, that's great. We'll keep an eye on it. We'll keep talking. Our job is to make sure that door stays open for people to move forward in their lives. Before I came in-house, I was a lawyer in private practice. But I have found that I love being part of the business, and part of the fun of being in the hospitality business is the hospitality part of it. It is incredible. We had a video presentation this morning, what we call Awards of Excellence, that we do annually, and it's given to people throughout the company. And most of them are people on property at the hotels. And it's everything from an accounting manager to a senior housekeeper, people whose unbelievable human spirit and their giving spirit is so inspirational. And for some lawyers, they look at it and they're like, yeah, way too touchy-feely for me, not interested. But there are a lot of us who really, although that's not what we do day to day, we don't have guest-facing jobs, and we're in, sort of that not fun part of the business. But you have to sort of absorb that sensibility, because otherwise you can't really enjoy the job and understand what the people at the properties are doing. And it's really those, and it's 95% of our workforce are the people who check you in and who clean your room and who bring you, food in a restaurant and things like that. And I have to say, there's some people for whom it's a job. And there are really other people who they get such enormous pleasure out of what they do that I find it completely inspiring. I worked pretty much, I have 2 kids, as I said, I worked pretty much the whole time. Work-life balance, as everybody knows, is a complete myth. If I had solved that problem, I'd be a billionaire and, giving speeches around the world, but nobody solves the problem. I like to call it more of a work-life juggle. And it's sort of a jigsaw puzzle as you try to fit all the pieces of your life together, and different things take precedence at different points. And some of it is being lucky enough, I guess, to say, look, hopefully we all have a very long arc of our careers and our lives. And things happen at various times, and you make various trade-offs at various times in your life. I started off, obviously, more of what we call a line lawyer, writing documents. I never did courtroom stuff, wasn't my thing. I was really a transactional lawyer. But one of the things that I've really enjoyed, both my role at Hyatt as the general counsel there, and now my role back at Marriott as the general counsel, is the ability to sort of guide teams, be a resource. I'm not the doer anymore. In fact, there are people on my teams who are way more competent than I am in things that I used to do. But to be able to really be a sounding board, help people develop their careers, talk to them about what they want to do, what interests them, what doesn't interest them. And I just find it incredibly satisfying.
Sabrina, one thing that, oh, sorry, go ahead. I don't want
Nope, nope. I was just going to say, really hard to do in a year like this past year when you think about all the pressures that we've all had. I mean, obviously there were industry pressures for us, company pressures, health. I mean, everybody, we had no idea what this thing was a year ago. People were worried about their families. You know, all of a sudden people were home with 3 kids trying to get them to go to Zoom school. People I knew who had teenagers or young adults who were in college who either were sitting in their basement doing classes or literally saying, I have a friend and a colleague at work. He said his daughter came up out of the basement the first week. She lives in Maryland, was supposed to be in California, still in Maryland, and said to her parents, I can't do this. This is not how she was a freshman in college and said, this is not how I want my freshman year to be. And basically took a year off and, you know, the family has gone on. And I think that George Floyd's murder in May was such an important pivot point for the whole country and many of our communities in terms of issues of racial justice, social justice, then of course, you know, all of the drama surrounding the election. There was a lot going on. And in the middle of all this, we weren't physically together. So part of what really I spent a lot of time thinking about is how do you keep the team together when you're physically apart? And I think, you know, we've done about as good a job as we could, not perfect. We learned a lot of things along the way. Some of them are lessons that will keep going, and some of it we just can't wait for things to normalize a little bit.
Yeah, I guess part of what I'm curious about is you do run, teams that are incredibly diverse across the country, across the world. And that takes there's a lot of things, part of what we looked at this past week was looking at how do you create psychological safety on a team so that people really can function well together and feel as if they can say what's important to them and even put their ideas out there. Or how do you build a cohesive team that has trust and can do conflict and can resolve issues in the goal of being effective and efficient. And that is a lot of responsibility as a leader while you're also going through these same complex issues that everybody else is going through. So I'm just a little bit curious about that. And I'll just leave it at that question.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I'm not sure I have a great answer, but let me talk about a couple of things. I think you're absolutely right. Honesty and trust is, if you don't have it, you can kind of pack up your toys and go home. And one thing I always feel really fortunate about is my immediate team of my direct reports. They are just amazing people. And especially at the beginning of the pandemic, we were literally meeting every morning. We had a lot to figure out. We had a lot of business stuff to figure out. We had a lot of personnel stuff to figure out. And some of it was just like, how are you guys doing? And I know, how are you is sort of a throwaway question. But I think what we all found in particular over the course of the past year was that it wasn't a throwaway question anymore. It was, how are you dealing with this on a very human level? Kind of take yourself out of the role that we all play at work. And that sort of humanity and friendship that we had, I think was irreplaceable. The other thing is I found you have got to keep your sense of humor through all this. At least I find there is no way to cope with stress and difficult situations when, kind of the world is falling around your ears or falling down around your ears. So I'll give you another example. You may have heard we had what we fondly call a cyber incident that we announced at the end of 2018, and it was big. There were a lot of people impacted. It had huge ramifications for the company. The legal teams were working with the IT teams and the marketing teams and our customer service teams round the clock. And again, we had this cadence of very regular meetings so that we could make sure to touch base. And we started these meetings with what we called a moment of levity. And it was just somebody would see something in a tweet or a headline, and it was like, guys, there is humor to be found in every situation, and we should share it with each other. We're sharing a lot of really awful stuff with each other. And my team, so this was early 2019, and I think we sort of resurrected this a little bit during COVID. So every once in a while we'll be in a meeting and someone will say, I have a moment of levity to share. And I just, I laugh every time I hear it because it just makes me feel so great. I think the other thing, and this really stemmed from talking about George Floyd. Look, issues of race, social justice, and the like, they used to be taboo in the workplace. It wasn't polite to talk about them. They're also very difficult conversations to have. The weekend George Floyd was killed, I sent a note to my team just about, in some ways it was cathartic. All of us, when we watch loved ones, kids, partners, parents, leave the house, you worry about them. You worry about what's going to happen. And then I sort of thought, oh my God, and if you are a person of color in this country, you really worry about what can happen when people that you love leave the house. And it was just, it was short, and it was just meant to open a conversation. And I got several responses back from several of our Black colleagues in the department. And we sort of started this dialogue. And I said to them, I'm as willing as you would like me to be to have this conversation about what we can do in the department, in the company, to talk about sort of, can we make a safe space for a conversation, even though, it's like, what are you doing on this? And 5 of us got together one day, again, Teams call, Zoom call, because we couldn't be in person, and had a really, really personal conversation, just trying to process what was going on, process what people were feeling, process how I, as both a white woman and the leader of the team, was looking at it and what we were willing to do. And I'm really proud to say it has kind of snowballed over the course of the year. We now call it our Take Care community, which is our corporate branding, Take a Stand initiative. And we have started everything from book groups to discussion clubs to trainings, unconscious bias trainings, pro bono efforts that people are involved in. And it all stemmed from conversations where people said, these are things that are hard to talk about. And if we don't talk about them, we're kind of shutting a piece of ourselves away. And we are not being who we are at work. Again, I'll give you an example. One of the women whom I've known for a very long time, her kids are the same age as my kids. So we've watched the kids grow up together. She's Black, 2 Black young men who are her sons. And she said to me, I don't stay in the old days for happy hours after work, and I'll tell you why. I live further away than many of the people do from the office. And I'm a Black woman driving home alone. And if I have a taillight out and it's a 40-minute drive and I get pulled over, I'm just not taking my chances. I'm not going to have anything to drink before I leave. And I just don't want to be in that situation. She had never shared anything like that with me before. And just the complete honesty that she was willing to bring to the conversation, I thought was remarkable. People asked, I don't understand. The company has made pronouncements about its support for LGBTQ people, but why aren't we making a statement on racial justice, which we then did make? But I had another member of my team who's unbelievable, who sent me the letter that the CEO of Under Armour had sent. It had started as an internal communication and then it was published. And he said to me, if you were a young, talented Black executive, which company would you want to work for? And it was just, as I said to somebody, it wasn't intended to be mean, and it wasn't intended to be anything more than a really legitimate challenge about how we were looking at ourselves, how the world was looking at us. I can't quite put my finger on what made it a safe space, but I think some of it is permitting yourself to be vulnerable. And obviously, people have all different levels of their willingness to share. And I'm not asking anybody, to share anything they're not comfortable with. But if people are willing to share and have a conversation, you can really kind of break through a lot of very superficial barriers, I think.
Yeah. I have a couple follow-up questions, but I want to give anybody else a chance on here if anyone has a question for Rena themselves or a comment or anything. Okay. Rena, I know I had sent an article, and I don't know if everyone in this group was able to read the announcements that I sent out today, but there was an article that was written about you, about how when you were in your office, you had the word be kind, or something about kindness outside your office. And so there's a part of me that's curious, since we are talking about how do you create, how do you set this culture, and how do you create this, kind of ability for people to finally feel safe. And granted, what happened this past year was really unusual. When the whole world cracks open, it does give people the ability and the strength to open up, to say, like what that woman said to you of, I can't stay, and here is why. It allowed that permission. But was there some element of what you did previous to this as a leader that people then maybe had a sense of you that was, we can trust Rena's lead? And also, maybe, I don't know if everyone got to read that article, maybe share a little bit about the kindness or be kind sign outside your door.
So I did hang a banner that said "Be kind" outside of my office when we were back at the office. And the former CEO, our former CEO, who unfortunately passed away earlier this year, who is himself a lawyer by training, he came by one day and he said, I thought this was the legal department. Like, what is that? And I said, look, fundamentally, to me, being kind, the sign I couldn't put up was don't be an asshole, but it's sort of the same thing. At the end of the day, I wasn't going to hang that up because I knew I'd get in trouble for that. But I think it really is part and parcel of the same thing. We sort of talk about the golden rule, do unto others as you would have done unto yourself. That's what it's all about. Like, you want to treat people the way you want to be treated. And I think, I think it comes, look, we can kindness to ourselves, permission not to be perfect, which, by the way, I'm terrible at because I am a perfectionist. And Rachel, you'll appreciate this, but as my husband likes to remind me all the time, I hate to tell you this, but you're human, you're not perfect. So I don't need him to tell me that anymore. I'm well aware of it. But it's also to the people that we do business with, so I think it comes up both in our personal relationships and even in work relationships, where you can be a jerk about things, and that sometimes that'll get you where you need to be. Or you can say, you know what, fundamentally, we're human. What do we have more in common than not in common? I think to set a stage for that, honesty is really important. And I think communication is really, really important. So, there are people who think that if they don't share information, sort of the more they have, the better off they are, because then you don't have that information. I think that it's not a zero-sum game at the end of the day. And I think that one of the things I've always found is if you can, look, there are certain things you can't communicate because things that either, you're being asked to keep quiet, or you literally can't say them until they become public. That's an issue that we have in a public company. But to the extent that you can share information, let people know what's coming, Be honest about what you know and you don't know. So we're dealing with it now as we try to wrestle like everybody else with this back to the office thing. Um, and, the company will come out with a policy, and I'm fond of saying, if it applies, that's great. And then we'll make it work for us because, I just think, look, we have people who have worked so hard over the past year. I trust everybody to really do stuff. And by the way, if you don't trust them to work at home, don't trust them to work in the office, because they'll be goofing off in the office as well. So nobody should kid themselves about that. But I do find that if you can give people, look, if you don't give people information, they will make stuff up. The rumor mill will start. And by the way, most of the stuff that gets chattered about is far worse than the reality. But I do think that if you build a culture where people say, okay, she's telling me what she can, as much as she can. She's telling me where she doesn't know what the answer is. Part of it is also saying, look, here's our direction that we're setting for now. And we may end up pivoting because we might get it wrong. And you guys, by the way, are the ones who might tell us, you know what, this is really misguided. It's causing all this anxiety and stress, and let's try something else. That's great. I would much rather have that.
Great. Leah, did you have a question? Because I've seen your mute button.
I'm curious, and I'm so sorry, I didn't read the article, so I'm sorry if this is a repetition.
All right.
But I'm curious if your Be Kind sign was in reaction to something that had happened, or if it was like more of a proactive, I see this coming, I think let's nip this in the bud.
Yeah, I would say it wasn't really in reaction to everything. My predecessor, who, by the way, had hired me originally, so that was kind of interesting. His sign was like agility or something. Okay, I got it. But to me, again, it's kind of a nice word, but what does it mean in terms of the relationships that we have with one another? I didn't think it really, it was like, okay, now we're going to do something different. I also think, for those of you who know lawyers, who have dealt with lawyers, not the best reputation sometimes in terms of our humanity. And I think, again, part of it is the business we're in, but part of it is just, to me, it was, this is how we should be treating each other. And this is how we should be treating everybody that we come across. Look, I think this holds for personal relationships as well. And especially when people are under stress and you're sort of reacting to things in the moment, if you can take a deep breath and sort of tell yourself, there's two ways of playing this. You can kind of be a jerk about it, or you can cut somebody a little slack. And I think that to me is, in some ways, it's a reminder to myself of how to behave because I don't profess to be perfect at it. And it's like, just remember that sign applies to you too. Don't get so, don't get so impressed that it doesn't really have anything to do with you. It has a lot to do with me.
Rena, it's so great that you said that, because one thing that we've been doing is we've done a values sort, which, values are like, how do we want to be and how do we want to move forward? So that's almost like your value, and wanting to be kind is a value that you want to uphold. And then the other part is we have been talking a bit about, empathy and compassion, and having like that part of us that can be there with our teammates and be there with everyone as we're going through these challenging times. One thing I'm just going to share really quickly, and I think folks have seen this, but Rena's bringing up a few things that I just want to share. So this is the authentic leadership map that at the end of this course, you'll all be filling in. And one part over here of rituals or norms and practices that Rena brought up was, I have a, what do you call it? Like a humorous moment, or
a moment of levity.
A moment of levity. So that could be, a norm and practice that you put on here for, you know, how do I keep myself and my team engaged, or for the rituals up here of what is a ritual that we do to take care of our team. So I just kind of wanted to point that out as we have this as something. And then the guiding word. So I have up here a guiding word and a power word, and I have them being two different things. So guiding word is the word that you think of like, kind of like Rena, like you said, I want this kindness. And so this would be your value, or you could even have a person in here. It could be, you know, and I will, everyone's going to get a worksheet of how to do this and explain it. And then the power word is a word that really helps you feel like a little like grounded in your confidence, you know? And for a while, I'm going to stop the share, but for a while, my power word was stare down. Like I was just going to be so like strong that I could stare anything down, even though I was a little bit nervous. And so that would have been my guiding, you know, my power word. My power words have changed over the time. But that leads me to ask, you know, last week we talked a lot about developing your resiliency as a leader, and even just as a person. And to me, one thing that these guys know, I'm not crazy about the word authentic or leader. What I'm crazy about is us all learning how to be people in relationship with each other in a way that helps us individually grow. And in that growth pattern, you know, there could be people that follow us, or maybe we're leading ourselves, or we're following ourselves. So I'm curious for you, what kinds of, when you think about resiliency for you, what are there things that you've done? Are there things that you've had to learn to be resilient?
Yeah, it's a great question. Let me think about that a little bit. I don't know that I have a great answer for it. I think optimism is a huge piece of this, and optimism can be learned. You know, some of us are naturally more optimistic than others, but I also think that you can say to yourself, look, there's two ways of looking at this, and I'm going to choose the one that lets me move forward as opposed to the one that kind of crushes me. So my dad passed away just before my 16th birthday. My sister was 15 at the time. My mother was a young woman. And you know, it's not like we had a choice. It's not like somebody calls you up and say, hey, do you want this bad thing to happen to you? Bad things happen to people. And I think the ability to sort of say, okay, you know, now we have to deal with this, pick ourselves up and move forward, was really important. But I will tell you that I think my sister and I are much more optimistic than my mother, who went on, she went back to school, she created a brilliant career, but she was always sort of pining away for the life that she thought she had that she didn't have anymore. And I think that as much as she's a remarkable person, but I think it damaged her in some ways, that she almost could not let herself be happy, or, you know, I mean, she was happy about certain things, but as an outlook on life, and to me, that's very sad, because look, all of us confront tragedy. All of us know people who confront tragedy. As I said before, the fact that I like to say to people, you know, no one escapes from life unscathed. We might not actually see what's going on in somebody's life, but believe me, there is nobody who escapes unscathed. And to me, the ability to sort of say, this is the hand I'm dealt, let me make the best of it. You know, I have wonderful parts of my life that I can sort of move forward with. And I sort of choose that as a way of looking for things. So I think that does, and it's the same thing, you know, whether it's a facet of resiliency or it is resiliency. But I think what makes you resilient is look, we could all curl up in a ball in a corner. And sometimes that's really good. And sometimes you need to do that and kind of let yourself go. And then, again, my choice is I can't do that forever. And I got to pick myself up and move forward.
Yeah.
Curious how much of that is like personality versus sort of upbringing or learned behavior for your
Yeah.
mom, you know, I mean, for all of us, but certainly for your mom, I mean, what is how much of that is just genetic
Yeah,
or
I don't
cultural?
know the answer. It's a great
Of
question.
course,
And I
of
would
course, yeah.
imagine that, look, we're all on spectrums on various things in terms of how we react to things. So you're absolutely right. My guess is some of it is that's kind of how you're hardwired. And it's hard to change those wiring mechanisms. But I do think that there is a piece of it that is learned, and that is a choice that you make. And look, people go through all sorts of terrible things. And, you read about people who survived, for example, massacres in Rwanda or concentration camps during the Holocaust. I don't know that, for everybody, they'd be able to just say, okay, I'm going to move forward. But a remarkable number of survivors of those tragedies. Now, part of it is compartmentalizing. You've just got to say, look, that was a horrible part of my life, and I'm going to move forward. And there are people who are more successful at it, than others. So I think it's a combination.
Yeah. Jordan, I'm curious if you have any questions at all. I don't want to ask you. I can see you're like shaking your head and thinking about things. And I know that you're, you are in a leadership position right now. And while it's at a different level, there's still a lot of interesting challenges that you've had to work through.
Yeah, I am enjoying this very much. I don't think I have any questions right now, but thank you for checking in, Rachel.
Sure. I just want to make some space for folks. How about Flavi? Do you have any questions? I don't know if you can hear me. I think so. No. Okay. And Tara or Mallory or Carly, did you want to ask anything or?
I'm with Jordan. I'm just really enjoying Rena right now. So thank you.
Thank you. Well, can I ask a question of all of you? I'd like you to think about, we're all in positions where we have leaders come to us. I'm curious to know, what question would you like a leader to ask you as a member of their team?
Funny you should ask. I actually had a situation today. I work at a college, and I had a professor write me a very nasty email over a small verbiage error that I made, mind you, but it devastated me. And not only did my direct supervisor check in on me, her boss checked in on me, and they asked if it was okay, if they had my permission to take it to leadership. And that meant the world to me. I've never had that before. I'm in my 40s, and I have never had that supportive of a leadership team in my entire life.
That's amazing.
So it started
those
out
are
as a
special.
really bad situation, and now I just think I'm so lucky that
That's
they
kind
are
of the
my
be kind thing, like you see somebody that was just like, why do that to somebody? And the fact that you have the support of your leaders to come in and, again, very human, just check on you. How are you doing? But really meaning it, as opposed to a throwaway line.
And then
Thanks for sharing that.
And then just even asking, I mean, they didn't have to ask my permission to take it to leadership, but they made a point of it. And that, I mean, that's, who does that?
Yeah.
So
good people do that.
Absolutely. I'm very lucky.
Thanks for sharing that.
One thing that we just started doing on our team is sharing at team meetings, just to kind of have that piece, because I think sometimes something that happens on Zoom is some of the personalization of like what you have in a real in-person meeting is kind of cut out, and it can be very much like, oh, let's get through these agenda items and go on with our day and make sure we get to everything we need to in this time. But we started doing pick like a rose and a thorn of your week, and then kind of talk about that. And we did it for our first time today, actually. And it was nice because some people had like some advice for people, or, some words of encouragement for their thorn, or just things like that. So I thought that was a fun thing to include in the meeting.
I like that. That's great. But some
I
of it is
personally
also,
like to be asked my opinion,
Mhm.
because sometimes I always have an opinion. But
Good.
I'm not currently in a leadership role, and it's when it happens, it's really nice to know that they want to know, like I'm in the weeds, right? It's good to know that they care what I think.
So I think you raise a great point. And one of the things I learned from a leader that I worked with is a leader can cast an inadvertent but very large shadow. And once somebody says something and you don't ask people what they think, people feel stifled. So I love that, that you're saying that, because one of the things I think it's important for us to learn is to really solicit ideas and opinions from people. And that goes right to what Rachel was talking about before in terms of empathy. You can't have empathy if you're not listening to somebody. And one of the most important things I think that we can do and encourage other people to do is just ask people to listen to us. And then when you are listening to somebody, really listen. Don't, what did they say? They say you have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason, and use them in that proportion. But it's also a question of making sure that, some people listen just kind of thinking, what am I going to say next? As opposed to really listening, and then maybe just take a few seconds, minutes to think about your response, as opposed to being so caught up in your response that you're actually not listening. Look, I will be completely honest with you. I'm still learning how to do this on a day-to-day basis. I have not mastered this skill by any stretch of the imagination, but if you kind of know what you're aiming for, it gives you some place to get.
Oh, Leah, I think you're still muted. Sorry.
It sounds like that's what Carly is doing, is inviting that to the group to like sort of start that, because it's hard for people, like it's not hard for me, but it's hard for lots of people to find that space to share, and then so to somehow give that opportunity, I think is really important.
Yeah, you raise a great point in terms of it can't be perfunctory. It has to be honest, and it has to be, I know, authentic, but it really does need to be authentic, that somebody actually is interested in what you have to say. They might not necessarily agree with you, but if you can give somebody a few seconds of pause to think about it, and somebody is willing to say, I'm going to take that seriously and really sort of turn it over in my mind, I think that's fantastic.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting when I think of that question, Rena. I think what I've always wanted leaders to ask is, what is this experience like for you? And do you have any thoughts, about how to improve upon it? Because often there's like a general direction that the train is going in. And when you come onto a job, it's like, are you coming on our train? Are you going to help steer the train?
Yeah.
And I think having a team, the beauty of a team is that they can help steer the train, and in different interesting directions, because none of us really knows everything or can predict the future. So I think that's the part of, I've coined this term called humble confidence. that I kind of put into this last week or the past couple weeks. And it's about that as a leader or a teammate, it's important to be confident, but it's the humble part is knowing that you can always find that someone else knows something different.
Yeah.
And that really opens up your ability to experience something differently or in a togetherness.
Yeah. I also think, to some extent, as members of a team, we have an obligation to stop somebody if you see them going down a path that you're like, oh, I'm not sure about that. And I'll give you another example. So it was fairly early on in my tenure at Hyatt, and we had a member of the group who he had really been promoted to a position that he shouldn't have been promoted to, and we needed to kind of reorganize and right size. And I remember sitting with my direct reports there and saying, I really think we need to pull him back a level on title and kind of get this in the right place. Nobody said a word. And I went home that night and I thought about it, and I thought, that would be an absolutely horrible thing to do. It would be humiliating for him. It really wouldn't solve anything. And honestly, at the end of the day, who cares? We'll get over it. And but to pull him back in such a public way just felt wrong. So we sat together the next day and I said, I got to tell you, I've thought about this again, and I'm changing course. I really think that would be a mistake. And, all four of them were like, oh God, we're so glad. We all thought that was a terrible idea. And I was like, guys, nobody said a word. You have an obligation. If you see me doing something really boneheaded, I want you to tell me that. Now, interesting question. Rachel, to your point before, had I not created a safe enough space where they felt like, oh God, we can't tell her we think she's wrong. So, maybe on me as well. But I also think that's the value of working in a team where, if you're starting to veer someplace off where you should be, you can get somebody who can kind of help guide you back in the right way.
Yeah, I'm just reading the chat. No problem,
Yeah.
Jordan. Go take the emergency.
Good luck. Good luck.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Yeah, active teams. So I'm just going to ask you one last question. And I mean, I think that you've already kind of touched on this a lot, but we started talking about this a little bit last week, and it was about resiliency. And I think it does have an effect of how we are as team members. And it's about sometimes, emotions come up, and often they're coming from lots of different directions. When you are juggling being a mom, working, running a business, going to school, just the juggles of life, right? Then all the other things, the world around us, the isolation of COVID, or, the diversity, equity, inclusion issues. We were talking about what it's like to express your emotions, and that there are certain emotions coming from women that are just not acceptable. Even though sometimes tears might come, but it doesn't mean you're crying because you're sad or hurt. It's just a reaction. And also just how do you manage all of that? So I'm curious from your perspective, what it's been like for you to do that. And then also, what has it been like for you as a leader if somebody does have emotions? And I'll show you the banner that I wore a couple classes ago. I don't know if you can see it.
That's great.
And it's because we are all having emotions all the time.
Yeah. So, great question. Let me just tell you two little stories. In a job that I had shortly after I got there, this was actually when I joined Hyatt, it was very clear to me that a person on my team was, she she was not going to be successful in that position. And we had to, I remember being told before I assumed the position, some really good advice, which is if you see changes that you need to make them, but don't make changes just because you have the power to make them. And after a few months of really realizing this was not going to be successful, I talked with my CEO and some other people, and we made the decision to separate and to have her leave the company. So I don't know if anybody has had to fire people. It's awful. It's like the worst thing you have to do as a leader. And by the way, no one hears anything you say after you tell them that their job is gone. So these conversations tend to be very short because nobody's paying attention anymore. And after this conversation, I was really shaken. So I went to the ladies' room because that's what you do, like got myself together and walked back to my office, and the CEO, who's male, saw me. This guy, very, very empathetic. And he looked at me and he said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "I'm okay, but I just had the conversation that I told you I was going to have with this person." And he said, "I really like the fact that this is hard for you, because it should be hard to do this." He said, "On the other hand, we have 90,000 people in the company who depend on us to make those hard decisions and do the right thing for everybody who works in this company." And I just thought that was pretty remarkable, which is, this is a hard thing to do. And I like that you're struggling with it, but you have to do it. That's part, you can't just ignore it and let the thing blow up. Sometimes you have situations that are different. And I just recently had one with a fairly senior lawyer in my department. We were talking about, of all things, we're moving to a new building next year, and how people on her team were getting themselves all spun up and upset about the physical layout of the office. Of course, I don't know what's going to happen, but we'll see. And I said, "Okay, I understand that." And then she raised it again and again. She raised it 4 times during this conversation. And I have to say, not necessarily the most patient person in the world. And I finally said to her, part of your job, part of our job collectively, is to make sure that we help bring people along on what's a difficult path for them. But she was so overwrought that I literally thought, there is something else going on here. And I called her later and I just said, "I just want to check in with you. Are you okay?" And somewhat to my surprise, she said to me, "Yeah, I'm fine. Why are you calling me?" And I was like, did you? And I think she was not conscious of how she had behaved in this, although several people afterwards, texted me during the meeting and they're saying, "What the hell is going on? She's got to get a grip on herself. She's supposed to be leading this team. And instead they're kind of all falling apart together and she's not helpful." So, I thought, okay, I don't want to intrude, but I want to make sure that there's nothing else going on in her life that's really sparking what I considered a complete overreaction and just really mishandled. And then she did it again in another meeting I was in. And it's actually a bit of a derailer for her because she almost can't get a grip on what's going on. And what happens is kind of chaos spreads from that. So I think, again, we all react in various ways. I really believe that to some extent, when we are at work or in professional settings, you play a role a little bit, you're on stage. And you have to, some of that is managing your emotions so you don't appear like an automaton, but some of it is kind of calibrating as to, how you don't either make people uncomfortable, because that really doesn't help, or just behave inappropriately and people think, oh my God. But I think it is helpful to people for them to know that you have human reactions and that you are going through. This past year is a great example of it. You know, we all went through hell, I would say. One of the most unbelievable videos that our former CEO did was last March, and he was completely choked up as he essentially said, look, this is going to be months of dislocation. People through no fault of their own are going to lose their jobs. And he was not really an emotional guy for the most part. It was, I mean, it brought tears to our eyes, but it was the fundamental humanity of him saying, I'm acting now as a person. I'm not acting in my role as CEO. And on the other hand, I can't abdicate my role as CEO because I have obligations to every single person who works in this company, not to mention the rest of our stakeholders. I got to figure out a way to lead ourselves out of this.
It seems like that's the second time that you shared, you know, I think the other it was the CEO of Hyatt, but that same thing of being human and continuing on with the tough job that you have to do.
Mm-hmm.
Leah, were you going to say something?
Always.
Good.
I'm curious again, because I'm on the other end of that. How do you bring that out of your leadership, right? Like these people who are supposed to be leading me aren't. How do I bring that out of them?
So sometimes you can't. Sometimes that's just not how they operate in the world that you are in. I don't know if you're in a position where you can sit down and have a cup of coffee with somebody and say, hey, look, I'm really curious about this. By the way, my authentic life is right behind me on the screen. So, you know, some of it is by the time they're in leadership positions, most people are kind of baked at that point. And some of them will learn and will refine, you know, you'll smooth around the edges a little bit. I'm not sure you're going to change their personalities, though. So some of it is, this is why people leave jobs or leave positions, because they feel like there's this wild disconnect between themselves and their leadership. And it's just, you know, they always say people leave jobs because of their bosses, not because of their job. And I think that's partly true.
That's a hard truth.
Yeah, Leah, this kind of reminds me of, were you here when Mike Frost was talking?
Yeah, I was, yeah.
Yeah, so this reminds, Rena, Mike Frost was another guest speaker, and he was the head of the counseling center on campus. So, you know, had a rather large 30-person staff and had to interact with all the different levels at the university. And the university has really been going through a rough time. You know, sexual assault scandals and goodness, like just horrible, horrible things. And so he's had to manage that. And he talked about kind of how his staff member came to him and basically was trying to manage up, you know, trying to get him to see something from a different perspective. But I think you're right. It is really, can be really, really challenging. And I think part of this course, especially where everybody is out in their career, is about what kind of culture do I want to set as a leader? Can I be flexible in who I am? Can I have that psychological flexibility? And can I also still continue on and manage and lead a thriving business or a thriving team? And it is a really tricky dance.
Mm-hmm.
Next week, we're going to be talking about growth mindset and learning about how it's really important that first of all, that we do have a growth mindset. Our brains still can grow. We still can learn. And so as a leader putting out there, how is it that I want to continue to grow? Where are the areas that I know I need to stretch? And that's how I kind of started this course off, was with about intention, and the Latin phrase of intention. The base of it means to stretch oneself. So I think, we're constantly questioning that in ourselves in this course, of how do I stretch myself, and how can I help others stretch themselves? And you're right, it is tricky when there's a power dynamic of leaders that control whether or not you have a job or not.
Yeah. So I think some of it too, I absolutely agree with everything you've said. And some of it too is the leader willing to listen to other people and take advice? And if, I think it's the Wall Street Journal that has this feature about, who's your kitchen cabinet? And, who are the people that you can go to say, be honest with me, where am I going wrong? And it's not that, again, they don't need to be mean, they can be gentle about it, but it's kind of almost a coach, and a player coach, if you're in that situation where you can be both. But again, there needs to be an openness and a willingness to accept that. And some people, they just don't have it. Look, there's a degree of, somebody said it before, humble confidence, as a matter of fact. You have to have a degree of humility to say, it doesn't matter what my position is, I can always get better. I can always tweak and improve this. I can always learn more stuff. And I think that for most of us, you end up leveraging your real strengths, because you're not going to completely change yourself if you couldn't do X at all. And I don't mean physically. It's really hard to change that hard wiring. Now, what you want to be careful of are things that are real derailers that are going to throw you out of the game completely. But you really want to focus on what you're really good at, and then get other people to help fill in the other stuff. Or you don't over-index on that stuff. You over-index on the stuff that, you're good at. And some of it is what you enjoy doing. You can always tell. I used to work for somebody, he couldn't stand managing people. It was pretty obvious, because it was just not, it wasn't that he was terrible at it. It's just, you could tell he didn't really care about doing it. So it was way down on the priority list. And every one of us who worked for him understood that.
Yeah. Well, Rena, I want to be respectful of your time. It is it's late on the East Coast, and I just so appreciate your joining us today.
Oh, it was my pleasure.
And yeah, I always like to give people one last chance. Is there anything anyone would like to share or say before we close with Rena, and then we'll continue on?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for listening.
That was great. Yeah.
Good night, everybody. Bye.
Bye, bye, Rena. All right. Great. Well, thank you, everyone, for partaking in that. Yeah, and I think that what I wanted to do today, well, one, I would love to hear your thoughts on, on speaking with Rena, or even some of the other guest speakers that we have. We have one more coming.
I guess I have to talk again. It's been so interesting for me, coming from a leadership position to technically not a leadership position, but looking forward to another leadership position. It's been really interesting to hear these things and not judge my leaders, right? And sort of live with that. And as a leader, obviously, I would have things that I could do better at. And it's been interesting and hard to know how to manage that. I don't know.
So to know how to manage, like you're hearing people talking about ways of being that you wish your leaders were right
Yes.
now. And
Right.
then you're stuck in that situation of, okay, well, this is my job. And so.
And
I
here's
need to
what's
work
important to
on-
me, but this is what I'm doing and this is what's happening. And the people who I work with are amazing people. They're amazing people. And it's funny that you said you don't like the word authentic, because I've thought about it so much lately, as sort of a definition of what I don't like about it. I can't figure it out because these are people I know and love. I know and love them. And I can't figure out what I don't like about what the leadership position part is. And it is that authenticity. What I know and love about them is not translated to the work relationship. And it's hard. And I want to be different than that personally.
Yeah. So it sounds like, so are you saying that the people that they do not act as that in their roles as leaders? You see them acting differently elsewhere.
And I happen to know them really well.
Yeah.
And how I know them personally is not how they behave as leaders. And it's hard.
Yeah, that is such an interesting thing to bring up, Leah. And I think that's part of what we, I think that's a big part of what this whole course is about. And I love that. Tara, do you want to jump in? I love that you use the hand raise. Isn't that fun? I'm still such a dork. I love how all these little emojis and reactions in Zoom.
Yes, I realized during this week's topic of growth mindset, how close-minded I've been towards my leadership, because I feel aligned with Leah in a lot of ways. And ultimately I feel that, or I have in the past before today's readings were due, I guess, that people either had it or they don't. And a lot of the leadership that's in place where I work is more like about tenure, and it's not about actual skill. And there's not a lot of investment in leadership development or training. So these people have just moved up over the years. And I think it's just because they're also victims of circumstance. But in addition to having that, okay, so maybe it is that they don't have the it thing that I think I do. I see it in Leah. I see it in people who are investing in themselves in these ways, like attending these classes. I think that's a big piece of it too, is the willingness to want to be a better leader, to have that self-reflection and to really own that growth mindset and want that in one's life. So I guess maybe I'm still not totally convinced about the it factor. And I kind of heard Rena saying that today as well.
Mm-hmm. Say more.
Just that not everyone is meant to be in those roles.
Yeah.
But then I read about it and it was like, well, truthfully, you can, So I'm conflicted, I guess, is what I'm saying. And I don't know how to put that to rest. I'm also not in a leadership role, but I'm really hopeful that one day I am, and I can put all this into practice.
I love, it's interesting. There's a part of me that loves that you're saying, I don't know if I can put that to rest, because I think the fact that you wrestle with it keeps it alive. So that maintains that edge of growth mindset, or that edge of being aware that, oh, I'm going to be aware that this is something that is so important. And I think it's complex. I think we are complex as people, right? And Leah, you're saying they're different people outside than when they get in the leader role. And then I heard Rena saying, sometimes we play a little bit of a role when you're in that. And so maybe people don't know what that role is supposed to be. Or there's that group dynamic, Afavi, you raised your hands. Am I saying your name correctly? Oh, you're still on mute.
Can you unmute?
Yeah, Afavi, you're on mute. Did you want to say something?
Can you unmute her yourself?
Oh, there you
Yeah.
go.
Oh, there she is. All right.
Okay, thank you. It's really a pleasure for me to meet you this night, because it is my first time. I am a little bit late for that course. I am a Humphrey Fellow from Togo, West Africa. I am in Montana to improve my English before joining Cornell, my university. So my first question is that what kind of leadership can we use if you have a team composed of only a man?
Ah,
Yeah, because I have this question from one of my entrepreneurs. She lead a company in mushroom production, but she's working with men. And she asked me, I am tired because I don't know how to manage that man. So I want to know what kind of leadership did I use to manage that man?
that's a really good
Yeah.
question.
Yeah.
And do the men not respect her as the leader because she's a woman?
Yeah, because sometimes I don't think maybe it's not only in my country, but I think everywhere, if men see that women is in the top, they have a little bit, I don't know, why women can be in the top.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Women in our culture, it's difficult to understand that women can lead men.
Mm-hmm.
In my country, it is so she has too much difficulty to manage that man.
Oh my goodness. I wish that Rena was still here for that question.
Yeah.
Mostly because she, in all honesty, she has worked all over the world.
Yeah.
She travels all over the world all the time and deals with different kinds of teams that are comprised of different, different cultures and different men, different women. I think that that's a really challenging question, hard to answer from this position of not knowing what it's like for her every day and what kind of feedback, she's getting, or how they're pushing her or pushing up against her.
Okay.
And I think that it's a lot about, she's a pioneer, it sounds like, right? If it's unusual in your country for her to be leading men. Yeah. Tara said that, Tara, you said you still see that here in the US. So do you have any advice or any ideas?
Well, I think being really direct is helpful. So if she faces something specific, being specific right back and saying, do you have a problem about topic, whatever? And then keep it on that, and it might open up a dialogue and they can get off their chest, perhaps, whatever anger they're feeling. I don't know if that would work, but at least it can be kind of specific and it doesn't have to go into the deeper meaning if they don't want it to, but she can keep it business and still engage them in conversation. That's a hard one.
That is a hard one, for sure.
It's so hard not understanding the culture really and what that looks like. I mean, it's hard for us to respond to that because we certainly run into the male dominated whatevers, but I can imagine that the culture is different. that she is experiencing, and it's like eggshells, right? Like, does she have to walk on eggshells? Probably. I don't know if you know that expression. You're doing a spectacular job of English, by the way. And and so you have to be sort of sensitive to what this other person, and it's similar, like that's kind of what I'm doing. I'm trying to be like sensitive to what that person wants, but really, really clear about boundaries, maybe.
Yeah.
Like clear about where my line is. And I respect whatever it is, and we can have a conversation, but here's my line that you cannot cross.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Is that helpful? Is that answering your question at all, or?
Hello.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you hear us, Afyavi?
Yeah. Do you ask me what is the question? Can you repeat
Oh, was
it?
that?
Oh, it's
was
just
it
if we're
helpful?
helping at all. That's what I was asking.
Yeah.
If it's helpful.
Yeah.
I think it's hard for us to know
to know.
what she would experience. So it's hard to say. But there are boundaries. There are lines that she can draw that are, I won't go forward or backward from this.
Okay.
And and then you go from there.
Yeah, I think it seems like it's something that it'd be helpful to know even in more detail. And if you wanted to talk about it at another time, I definitely could sit with you and we could talk about this more and think about it. It's definitely a very large question.
Yeah. Okay. So
Oh no,
be a pleasure. It will be a pleasure for me to discuss about that and have a good proposition for everybody, from everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's a great question, and I appreciate your asking it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah. So for the next couple weeks, next week we have Christine Liddick coming to talk about growth mindset, and Christine has held many, many different hats in this community and definitely has grown and challenges herself with always keeping that growth mindset of what her edges are and where she needs to move. And then the very last class is going to be about, how do we maintain this concept of authentic leadership? And it's not that I'm against the word authenticity. I think that it's just a challenge. I think more for me, I believe everybody, like I said to Rena, I think that we're all leaders in a sense. And so I think I've always struggled with that term leader. I get a little like the authenticity or leader, it's like gets a little greenwashed to me after a while. That's all. But I do think it's really important for us to think about how are we true to ourselves and how are we true to the mission that we're working towards and how are we true to our teammates. And so that is a really good thing. So I do want to show you once again, and I gave you guys already this authentic leadership map, but it's going to be posted in week 6, and I've made it so that it's fillable, so that you could go in and change things. But I also have a guide that goes with this that talks with you about how to fill this out. So I just want to make sure that you have this. So, and if you don't, I don't know if you have any questions about this, because for some of you that are taking this and want to receive any kind of credit, this is kind of like the final kind of activity for it. So. Well, I don't really have anything else. There's only just a couple more minutes till 7:30. But but it's been, as always, great to see you all. I hope you have a good week, and do not hesitate ever to write to me in between classes if you have questions. And Afiavi, I'll send you an email and then
Okay.
set up a time to chat.
Okay.
Does that sound good?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, wonderful. All right, we'll see you all later. Have a good week.
Yeah.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay.